Her Unforgiven Debt. Valeria Marchesi had spent 5 years running, erasing every trace of the name she was born with. But when her brother stole from the wrong man, her past came knocking, wrapped in a tailored suit and a voice that dripped like honey over steel. Nicolò Moretti leaned against the bar, watching her with something between amusement and possession. "You should have stayed hidden," he murmured. "Now I own you." Chapter 1. The Ghost of Valeria Returns. The rain was a relentless curtain, blurring the neon lights of the small bar where Valeria, now calling herself Lena, worked. It was a Thursday night, quiet, the kind of night where the only sounds were the rhythmic clinking of glasses and the low hum of the blues playing softly from the speakers. Lena preferred it this way. Quiet meant anonymity. Anonymity meant safety. 5 years. 5 years she'd built this life, carefully constructing a wall between her present and the past she'd desperately tried to bury. She polished a glass, her movements economical, practiced. Her hands, once accustomed to the feel of silk and the weight of heirloom jewelry, now knew the rough texture of bar towels and the chill of cheap beer taps. The transformation was almost complete. Almost. The lingering elegance in her posture, the unconscious grace in her movements, the way her dark eyes still held a flicker of aristocratic fire, those were harder to erase. She dyed her hair a nondescript brown, hiding the raven black that had been a Marchesi family trademark. She'd adopted a slightly hunched posture, trying to diminish her height, the proud bearing that had been drilled into her since childhood. Lena glanced at the reflection in the mirror behind the bar. A woman stared back, older, wearier, but with a resilience etched into the fine lines around her eyes. She barely recognized the girl. She'd been the pampered daughter of a powerful Mafia family, destined for a life of gilded cages and arranged alliances. That girl had been shattered, broken by betrayal and loss. This woman, Lena, was a survivor. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a new arrival. Lena didn't look up immediately, finishing the task at hand. It was a habit, a deliberate delay, a way of asserting control in a world where she often had none. When she finally did glance up, her breath hitched. He was leaning against the bar, a study in controlled power. Tall, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his impeccably tailored dark suit, he exuded an aura of dangerous elegance. His hair was the color of midnight, slicked back from a face that could have been carved from marble-high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and eyes that were the unsettling shade of a stormy sea. Those eyes were fixed on her, unwavering, a predator assessing its prey. Lena felt a chill crawl down her spine, a primal fear that bypassed logic and reason. She knew that look. She'd seen it in her father's eyes, in her brother's eyes, in the eyes of the men who populated the world she'd fled. It was the look of ownership, of absolute certainty. He didn't speak at first, simply watched her, letting the silence stretch, letting the tension build. The blues music seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the frantic beating of her own heart. The bar, once a haven, suddenly felt like a trap. Finally, he moved, a slow, deliberate unfolding of his body that was both graceful and menacing. He placed a hand on the bar, his fingers long and elegant, a single, heavy gold ring glinting on his index finger, a serpent coiled around a ruby. The Moretti family crest. Lena's hand tightened around the glass she was holding. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her expression carefully blank. "Can I help you?" Her voice was surprisingly steady, a testament to the years she'd spent perfecting the art of deception. He smiled then, a slow, chilling curve of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Valeria Marchesi," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very air around them. The name, her real name, sounded alien, a relic from a life she'd thought she'd left behind. It felt like a brand, searing her skin. Lena's carefully constructed composure cracked. A flicker of fear, raw and undeniable, crossed her face. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 5 years. It was a ghost, a phantom, a reminder of everything she'd lost. "I don't know who that is," she said, her voice a little shaky now. She placed the glass down on the bar, the sound louder than she intended. He chuckled, a low, throaty sound that sent shivers down her spine. Don't insult my intelligence, Kara. You can dye your hair, change your name, hide in this establishment, but you can't erase who you are. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. The scent of his cologne, a heady mix of sandalwood and something darker, more primal, filled her senses. The Marchesi blood runs strong, and it always calls to its own. Lena swallowed hard, trying to regain control. I don't understand. Your brother, Leo, he said, his voice turning hard, the honeyed tone replaced by the steel beneath. He made a mistake. A costly one.
Lei.
Her impulsive, reckless younger brother. The one she'd always protected, always bailed out of trouble. The one she'd hoped had finally straightened out, found a life away from the darkness. Hope, she realized, was a dangerous luxury. Leo, what did he do? Niccolò Moretti straightened, his eyes cold and unforgiving. He stole from me. From my family. And in our world, Valeria, debts are always repaid. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Your father is dead. Your other brother unavailable. That leaves you. Lena felt a cold dread settle in the pit of her stomach. She knew the code. Family was everything. Debts were sacred. And the Moretti family was known for its ruthlessness, its unwavering adherence to the old ways. I have nothing to do with my family, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I haven't spoken to them in years. Irrelevant, he said dismissively. You are Marchesi. And the Marchesi, the Moretti.
A considerable sum.
He paused, his eyes raking over her, assessing, calculating. Or its equivalent. Lena's mind raced. She had no money, nothing of value. The life she'd built was fragile, precarious. It wouldn't survive a collision with the world she'd left behind. He seemed to read her thoughts. Don't worry, Kara, he said, that chilling smile returning. I'm not interested in your meager savings. I have something else in mind. He reached out and gently traced the line of her jaw with a single finger, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. It was a possessive gesture, a blatant claim. Lena flinched, but she didn't pull away. She couldn't. She was trapped. You should have stayed hidden, he murmured, his voice dropping to a whisper, his breath warm on her cheek. Now, I own you. The rain continued to fall, washing away the illusion of safety, leaving Lena exposed and vulnerable. The ghost of Valeria Marchesi had returned, and with it, the world she had tried so desperately to escape. She was no longer Lena, the quiet bartender. She was Valeria, the daughter of a dead capo, a pawn in a game she no longer understood, a debt to be paid. And Niccolò Moretti, the man who held her fate in his hands, was watching her with the cold, calculating eyes of a predator who had finally cornered his prey. The future, once a blank canvas of possibilities, was now a dark and uncertain path, leading her back into the heart of the world she had sworn never to return to. She wondered if she would ever be able to break free again, or if her past had finally, irrevocably, caught up with her. Chapter 2. A debt demanded in shadows. The ride to the Moretti estate was a blur of rain-streaked city lights and a silence so thick it felt suffocating. Lena sat stiffly in the back of the luxurious black car, Niccolò beside her, an unreadable presence. He hadn't spoken since they left the bar, leaving her to stew in a cauldron of fear and uncertainty. Every glance out the window, every flash of passing headlights, felt like a reminder of how far she was being pulled from the life she'd built. She tried to focus on the details, on anything that would anchor her to reality. The plush leather seats, the faint scent of cedar and expensive tobacco clinging to the air, the muted hum of the engine all served as stark contrasts to the worn vinyl booths and stale beer smell of her bar. It was a different world, a world of power and privilege, a world she'd once belonged to, and one she'd desperately tried to escape. Her mind replayed the conversation, or rather, the pronouncements at the bar. I own you. The words echoed in her head, each syllable a chain binding her to a past she'd thought she'd buried.
Lei.
Her reckless, beloved brother. What had he done? How much had he stolen? And what did Niccolò Moretti mean by its equivalent? The possibilities that flickered through her mind were terrifying. She stole a glance at him. He was staring out the window, his profile sharp and defined against the city lights. He looked detached, almost bored, as if hauling a former Mafia princess back into his world was an everyday occurrence. That detachment, that casual display of power, was more intimidating than any overt threat. She remembered the stories about the Moretti family. Ruthless, they were called. Unforgiving. They were one of the oldest families in the city, their roots intertwined with the very fabric of the underworld. Her father, a man not easily intimidated, had always treated the Moretti with a cautious respect. And Niccolò, he was the heir apparent, the one groomed to take over the empire. The stories she'd overheard as a child painted him as a shadow, a whisper in the dark, a force to be reckoned with. The car slowed, turning onto a long, winding driveway lined with ancient, gnarled trees. The rain had lessened to a drizzle, and through the mist, Lena could make out the imposing silhouette of the Moretti mansion. It was a fortress, a sprawling structure of stone and glass, perched on a hill overlooking the city. Lights glowed warmly in the windows, a deceptive beacon of comfort in the heart of a storm. The car came to a stop in front of a massive oak door. A uniformed driver hurried to open Lena's door, his movements precise and deferential. She stepped out, her legs feeling unsteady. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of wet earth and something else, something indefinable, that spoke of old money and older secrets. Niccolò joined her, his presence looming over her. He didn't offer his arm, didn't offer any pretense of courtesy. He simply gestured towards the door. Inside, Lena hesitated for a moment, her gaze fixed on the mansion. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but it felt like a cage, a gilded trap waiting to swallow her whole. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. She'd survived this long. She would survive this too. She walked towards the door, her back straight, her head held high. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her fear. She was a Marchese, after all. Even a disgraced, exiled Marchese still had some pride. The interior of the mansion was as opulent as she'd imagined. A vast entrance hall, with a marble floor and a sweeping staircase, opened up before her. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, casting a warm glow on the antique furniture and priceless artwork that adorned the walls. It was a museum, a testament to generations of Moretti power. A woman, middle-aged, with a stern face and impeccably dressed in a dark, conservative suit, approached them. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, flickered over Lena before settling on Niccolò. "Signore Moretti," she said, her voice respectful but firm. "Everything is prepared." Niccolò nodded. "Good. Isabella, this is Valeria Marchesi. She will be staying with us for a while." Isabella's gaze returned to Lena, her expression unreadable. "Welcome, Signorina Marchesi." The words were polite, but there was a subtle undercurrent of something else, something that made Lena uneasy. "Isabella is my housekeeper," Niccolò said, a slight emphasis on the word housekeeper that suggested a broader range of responsibilities. "She will ensure you have everything you need." Lena nodded, offering a small, polite smile. "Thank you." "Isabella, show Signorina Marchesi to the East Wing guest room," Niccolò continued. "And ensure she is comfortable." The emphasis on comfortable this time felt like a veiled threat. Isabella nodded, turning to Lena. "This way, Signorina." Lena followed Isabella through the labyrinthine corridors of the mansion. The silence was heavy, broken only by the soft click of their heels on the marble floors. The air felt thick with unspoken words, with secrets that hung in the air like dust motes in a sunbeam. The East Wing guest room was, predictably, lavish. A large, four-poster bed dominated the room, draped in rich fabrics. A fireplace crackled merrily, casting a warm glow on the antique furniture. A large window offered a breathtaking view of the city lights, now twinkling like scattered diamonds in the distance. "Will there be anything else, Signorina?" Isabella asked, her voice devoid of any warmth. Lena shook her head. No, thank you. Isabella nodded curtly and left, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Lena stood in the middle of the room, feeling utterly alone. She was trapped. Trapped in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury, but a prisoner nonetheless. She walked over to the window, gazing out at the city below. It looked so peaceful from up here, so far removed from the darkness that had enveloped her. She wondered if she would ever be able to find her way back to the light, to the life she'd so carefully constructed. A sudden sound made her turn. Nicolo was standing in the doorway, watching her. He'd removed his suit jacket, and his white shirt was open at the collar, revealing a glimpse of dark hair on his chest. He looked even more dangerous, more predatory, in this relaxed pose. "Comfortable?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that seemed to fill the room. Lena didn't answer. She simply stared at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. He smiled, that slow, chilling smile that made her blood run cold. "You'll learn," he said. "You'll learn the rules. You'll learn your place." He walked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped just inches away, close enough for her to feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough for her to smell that intoxicating scent of sandalwood and danger. "You belong to me now, Valeria," he said, his voice a husky whisper. "And I always collect what is mine." He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face, his touch sending a shiver down her spine. It wasn't a gentle touch, it was a possessive one, a marking. He leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. "Sleep well, Kara," he whispered. "Tomorrow your education begins." He turned and left, leaving Lena standing alone in the opulent room, the silence pressing in on her. The city lights, once a symbol of hope, now seemed to mock her, a reminder of the freedom she'd lost. She was a prisoner, a pawn in a game she didn't understand, and her captor was a man who exuded both danger and a terrifying, magnetic allure. The debt had been demanded, and the shadows had claimed her. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that her life would never be the same. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, a flicker of defiance ignited. She would not break. She would not surrender. She would find a way to survive. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Past Life. The morning light, filtered through the sheer curtains, painted the room in soft hues of gold and rose. Lena awoke slowly, her mind still clouded by the events of the previous night. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure of where she was. Then, the memories came flooding back: the bar, Nicolo Moretti, the imposing mansion, the chilling pronouncements. She sat up in the bed, the silk sheets pooling around her waist. The room was silent, the only sound the faint crackling of the embers in the fireplace. She felt a strange sense of unreality, as if she were trapped in a dream. A luxurious dream, perhaps, but a dream nonetheless. She got out of bed, her feet sinking into the plush carpet. She walked over to the window, drawing back the curtains. The view was even more breathtaking in the daylight. The city sprawled below, a tapestry of rooftops and winding streets, bathed in the morning sun. In the distance, she could see the faint outline of the harbor, the water shimmering like a sheet of silver. It was a view she'd seen many times before, from the windows of her childhood home. The Marchesi estate had been located on the opposite side of the city, but the view had been similar. A wave of nostalgia washed over her, a bittersweet ache for a life that was gone. She turned away from the window, her gaze sweeping over the room. It was beautiful, undeniably so, but it felt sterile, impersonal. It lacked the warmth, the lived-in quality of her small apartment above the bar. There, she had surrounded herself with things that brought her comfort: books, plants, a few cherished photographs. Here, there was nothing that spoke of her, nothing that reflected her personality. She noticed a small, antique writing desk tucked into a corner of the room. On the desk was a silver tray, holding a pot of coffee, a plate of pastries, and a single, perfect rose in a crystal vase. A small, folded note lay beside the tray. Lena picked up the note, her fingers trembling slightly. The handwriting was elegant, precise, unmistakably Nicolo's. Enjoy your breakfast. Isabella will be here shortly to assist you. We will meet at noon. The note was terse, impersonal, yet it sent a shiver of apprehension through her. We will meet at noon. The words felt like a summons, a reminder of her precarious position. She poured herself a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling the room. She took a sip, savoring the warmth, the familiar taste. It was a small comfort, a fleeting moment of normalcy in a world that had turned upside down. She ate a pastry, the sweet, flaky dough melting in her mouth. It was delicious, but she had little appetite. Her stomach was in knots, her mind racing with 1,000 unanswered questions. A knock on the door startled her. Isabella entered, her expression as composed and unreadable as ever. "Good morning, Signorina Marchesi," she said, her voice polite but devoid of any warmth. "Signore Moretti has requested that I assist you in preparing for your meeting." Lena nodded, setting down her coffee cup. "Thank you, Isabella." Isabella led her to a large walk-in closet filled with clothes. Dresses, skirts, blouses, trousers, all in luxurious fabrics, all in shades of black, gray, and deep jewel tones. It was a wardrobe fit for a queen, or perhaps a prisoner. "Signore Moretti has anticipated your needs," Isabella said, her voice betraying a hint of something that might have been disapproval. Lena felt a surge of anger. He was treating her like a doll, dressing her up, controlling every aspect of her life. She wanted to refuse, to demand to wear her own clothes, but she knew it was pointless. She was in his world now, playing by his rules. She chose a simple black dress, knee-length, with long sleeves. It was elegant, understated, a suitable uniform for a captive. Isabella helped her dress, her movements efficient and impersonal. She styled Lena's hair, pulling it back into a sleek chignon. She applied a touch of makeup, enhancing Lena's natural beauty without making her look overly made up. As Isabella worked, Lena studied her reflection in the mirror. She looked different. The simple dress, the elegant hairstyle, the subtle makeup, they had transformed her. She looked more like the Valeria Marchesi of old, the polished, sophisticated woman she'd tried so hard to leave behind. It was a disturbing transformation. It was as if Niccolò Moretti was stripping away her carefully constructed identity, forcing her to confront the ghost she'd been running from. "There," Isabella said, stepping back to admire her work. "You look presentable." The word presentable felt like a subtle insult, a reminder that Lena was an outsider, an interloper in this world. Lena met Isabella's gaze in the mirror. "Thank you, Isabella," she said, her voice even. She wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. Isabella nodded curtly and left the room. Lena remained standing in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She was a stranger to herself, a ghost from a past life. The echoes of that past life were all around her, in the opulent surroundings, in the clothes she wore, in the way people treated her. She felt a growing sense of unease, a premonition that this was just the beginning, that the deeper she went into this world, the harder it would be to find her way back out. The meeting at noon loomed, a dark cloud on the horizon, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that it would change everything. She could feel it, the weight of the past pressing down on her, threatening to suffocate her. But beneath the fear, a flicker of resolve remained. She had survived this long, and she would continue to survive. She would not let Niccolò Moretti, or anyone else, break her. Chapter 4. The Cage of Gilded Promises. Noon arrived with the unsettling precision of a ticking clock. Lena, dressed in the somber black dress, found herself escorted by Isabella through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors once more. The silence, broken only by the rhythmic tap of their heels on the polished floors, amplified the tension coiling in Lena's stomach. Each painting, each antique, each meticulously placed piece of furniture seemed to whisper of the Moretti family's long and likely bloody history. Isabella stopped before a pair of imposing, dark wood doors, intricately carved with scenes of what looked like mythological hunts. "Signore Moretti is waiting for you in the study," she stated, her voice neutral, her eyes betraying nothing. She opened one of the doors just enough for Lena to pass, then retreated with a barely perceptible nod. Lena stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a heavy, definitive thud. The study was as opulent and intimidating as the rest of the mansion, but with a distinctly masculine air. Dark wood paneling covered the walls, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A large, imposing desk, also of dark wood, dominated the room. Behind it, a wall of windows offered a panoramic view of the estate's manicured gardens, a stark contrast to the room's somber interior. Nicolo was standing by the window, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. He was dressed in a dark suit, similar to the one he'd worn the previous night, but this one seemed even more impeccably tailored, emphasizing his broad shoulders and lean physique. He radiated power, even standing still, even with his back turned. Lena cleared her throat, the sound echoing slightly in the large room. "You wanted to see me." He turned slowly, his movements fluid and controlled. His stormy sea eyes fixed on her, assessing, probing. He didn't smile, didn't offer any pretense of welcome. "Valeria," he acknowledged, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the room.
"Come in. Sit down."
He gestured towards a pair of leather armchairs placed in front of the desk. Lena walked towards the chairs, her steps measured, her posture deliberately straight. She sat down, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on him. She wouldn't show him any weakness, any fear. He remained standing, circling the desk slowly, like a predator circling its prey. He stopped in front of her, his presence looming over her. "You understand why you're here," he stated, his voice devoid of any emotion. It wasn't a question. Lena nodded, her throat tight.
"Lei."
He inclined his head slightly. "Your brother's indiscretion has created a problem. A significant debt." "How much?" Lena asked, her voice surprisingly steady. She needed to know the extent of the damage, the price of her freedom. He named a figure, a sum so astronomical that it made her head spin. It was more money than she could ever hope to repay, more money than she'd seen in her entire life, even during her privileged upbringing. "It's impossible," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He smiled then, a cold, humorless curve of his lips. "For you, perhaps. For the Moretti, it's manageable. But debts must be repaid, Valeria. One way or another." "What do you want?" she asked, her voice raw. She knew the answer, or at least, she feared she did, but she needed to hear him say it. He leaned closer, his face inches from hers. She could smell that intoxicating scent of sandalwood, and something darker, something dangerous. "I want you," he said, his voice a husky whisper. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She'd expected this, but hearing the words spoken aloud, seeing the possessive gleam in his eyes, made it all the more terrifying. What does that mean?" she asked, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. "It means," he said, his voice dropping to a murmur, "that you will become my ward. You will live here, under my protection, under my control. You will learn to obey me. You will learn to be useful." The word useful hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Lena felt a cold dread settle in the pit of her stomach. She was a pawn, a possession, a piece in his game. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly, despite her efforts to control it. He straightened, his eyes turning cold and hard. "You don't have that option, Valeria. Your brother's life, your own well-being depends on your cooperation." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Lena looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. She was trapped, caught in a web of his making. She had no choice, no leverage, no way out. "I understand," she said, her voice barely audible. He nodded, a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction crossing his face.
"Good.
Then we understand each other." He walked back to his desk and sat down, picking up a pen and twirling it between his fingers. "There will be rules, Valeria. Expectations. You will learn them. You will abide by them." He proceeded to outline those rules, his voice calm and measured, each word a chain binding her tighter. She was to be confined to the estate, her movements monitored, her contacts limited. She was to dress appropriately, behave impeccably, and be available to him whenever he required her presence. She was to be, in essence, a prisoner in a gilded cage. As he spoke, Lena felt a growing sense of despair. He was stripping away her freedom, her independence, everything she'd worked so hard to build. He was reducing her to nothing, a mere object to be controlled and possessed. But beneath the despair, a flicker of rebellion ignited. She wouldn't be broken. She wouldn't surrender. She would find a way to survive, to maintain some semblance of her own identity, even within the confines of his world. "Is that clear?" he asked, his voice sharp, breaking through her thoughts. Lena met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "Yes," she said, her voice firm, despite the turmoil raging inside her. "It's clear." He nodded, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Good. Then let's begin your education." He stood up and walked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped in front of her, his presence overwhelming. He reached out and gently cupped her chin in his hand, his touch sending a shiver through her. "The first lesson, Kara," he murmured, his voice low and husky, "is that you belong to me." He leaned in, and for one terrifying, exhilarating moment, she thought he was going to kiss her. Instead, he simply stared deep into her eyes, the intensity sending another wave of ice and fire through her. He released her chin. "Dinner is at 8. Isabella will show you the way. Do not be late." With that, he turned and walked back to his desk, leaving Lena sitting there, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. The cage of gilded promises had closed around her, and she knew that her life, as she knew it, was over. The education had begun, and she was a student in a school of shadows, with a master who was as dangerous as he was captivating. She was adrift, lost in a world of power and control, and she had no idea how to navigate it, how to survive it. But one thing was certain, she would not be a passive victim. She would fight, in her own way, to retain some semblance of herself, to resist the complete and utter control he sought to exert. Chapter 5. Whispers in the Moretti Mansion. The following days settled into a strange, unsettling routine. Lena was a ghost in the Moretti Mansion, drifting through the opulent rooms, a silent observer of a life she was forced to be a part of, but never truly belonged to. She ate her meals in a formal dining room, often alone, the silence broken only by the clinking of silverware and the hushed movements of the servants. She spent hours in the library, losing herself in books, trying to escape the reality of her situation. She walked in the gardens, the manicured beauty a stark contrast to the wild, untamed landscape of her emotions. Isabella remained a constant, watchful presence, ensuring that Lena adhered to Niccolò's rules. She was efficient, impersonal, and utterly unyielding. Lena tried to engage her in conversation, to find some common ground, but Isabella remained aloof, her responses curt and devoid of any warmth. It was clear that her loyalty lay solely with Niccolò. Lena saw Niccolò infrequently, usually at dinner. He was always impeccably dressed, always polite, always distant. He treated her with a chilling courtesy, as if she were a guest of honor, rather than a prisoner. Their conversations were brief, superficial, carefully avoiding any mention of Leo, of the debt, of the true nature of their arrangement. But even in those brief encounters, Lena felt the weight of his presence, the unspoken power he wielded. She was constantly aware of being watched, of being assessed. She felt like a butterfly pinned under glass, her every movement scrutinized. One evening, after dinner, Niccolò surprised her by suggesting a walk in the gardens. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. The air was cool and fragrant, carrying the scent of roses and jasmine. They walked in silence for a while, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath their feet. Lena kept her distance, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "You're quiet," Niccolò observed, his voice a low murmur that seemed to blend with the evening breeze. Lena shrugged. "What is there to say?" He stopped, turning to face her. His eyes, in the fading light, seemed darker, more intense. "You could tell me about yourself," he said. "About the life you built." Lena hesitated. She'd been so careful to keep her past hidden, to avoid any mention of her former life. But there was something in his voice, a subtle shift in his tone, that made her wonder if he was genuinely interested. "There's not much to tell," she said, her voice guarded. "I worked. I survived." He studied her for a moment, his gaze searching. "You were happy?" The question surprised her. "Happy?" she echoed. "I was content. I had peace." He nodded slowly.
"And now?"
Lena looked away, her gaze fixed on the distant city lights, now twinkling like scattered diamonds. "Now I'm here." He didn't respond, allowing the silence to stretch between them. Lena felt a sudden urge to confide in him, to tell him about the fear, the loneliness, the constant sense of being trapped. But she held back. She couldn't trust him. She couldn't afford to. "You remind me of someone," he said, his voice soft, almost wistful. Lena looked at him, surprised. "Who?" He hesitated for a moment, his expression unreadable. "My mother," he said finally. She wasn't happy here either. It was the first time he'd revealed anything personal, anything that hinted at a life beyond the cold, controlled facade he presented to the world. Lena felt a flicker of something empathy, perhaps. "What happened to her?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "She died," he said, his voice flat. "When I was young." Lena sensed a deep well of pain beneath his words, a pain he was unwilling to share. She understood that pain, the pain of loss, the pain of a life shattered. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded, his gaze still averted. They stood there for a moment, in silence, the air thick with unspoken emotions. It was a fleeting connection, a shared moment of vulnerability in a world of power and control. Then he straightened, his mask of detachment slipping back into place. "It's getting late," he said, his voice once again cool and impersonal. "We should go back." They returned to the mansion, the silence between them no longer comfortable, but heavy with unspoken words. Lena felt a strange mix of emotions, confusion, curiosity, and a flicker of something she couldn't quite define. As she lay in bed that night, she replayed the conversation in her mind. His words, "You remind me of someone." "My mother." It was a glimpse behind the curtain, a hint of the man beneath the mask. And it made her wonder, who was Niccolò Moretti, really? What lay beneath the surface of that cold, controlled exterior? The whispers in the mansion seemed to grow louder, hinting at secrets, at tragedies, at a past that shaped the present. She was beginning to realize that she wasn't just a pawn in a financial game, she was caught in a web of family history, of unspoken grief, and of a legacy she was only beginning to understand. And the more she learned, the more she realized that her survival might depend on uncovering the truth, on understanding the man who held her captive. The fear remained, but it was now mingled with a growing curiosity, a determination to unravel the mysteries that surrounded her. Chapter 6. The Serpent's Dance of Trust. The library became Lena's sanctuary. Within its hushed, book-lined walls, she found a temporary escape from the suffocating reality of her captivity. She devoured books on history, art, and philosophy, seeking knowledge, seeking solace, seeking anything that would take her mind away from her present circumstances. One afternoon, while searching for a particular volume on Renaissance art, she stumbled upon a hidden section of the library. Behind a seemingly innocuous bookshelf, a narrow, concealed door led to a small, circular room. Curiosity overriding her caution, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, the only light source a single, stained glass window depicting a coiled serpent, its scales shimmering in hues of emerald and ruby, the Moretti crest, but rendered in an ancient, almost menacing style. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, a scent that spoke of centuries of secrets. The walls were lined with shelves, filled not with books, but with ancient scrolls, bound in leather and secured with intricate clasps. Lena felt a thrill of excitement, a sense of discovery. this was something different. This wasn't just a library, it was an archive, a repository of hidden knowledge. She carefully picked up one of the scrolls, her fingers tracing the faded script. It was in Latin, a language she'd studied as a child, but hadn't used in years. She slowly deciphered the words, her heart pounding with excitement. It was a chronicle, a detailed account of the Moretti family history, dating back centuries. As she read, she began to piece together a story far more complex and disturbing than she'd ever imagined. The Moretti weren't just a mafia family, they were an ancient lineage, their roots intertwined with the very foundations of the city. They had been power brokers, kingmakers, and, at times, ruthless enforcers. The scrolls spoke of alliances, betrayals, vendettas, and secrets that had been carefully guarded for generations. She found references to Niccolò's mother, Isabella, a woman described as beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely independent. But her story ended tragically, shrouded in mystery. The scrolls hinted at a conflict, a betrayal, a secret that had cost her her life. Lena felt a growing sense of unease as she read. The more she learned, the more she realized that she was caught in a web of ancient rivalries and long-held grudges. She was not just a pawn in a financial transaction, she was a piece in a much larger, more dangerous game. A sound startled her. She quickly rolled up the scroll and placed it back on the shelf, her heart pounding. She turned to see Niccolò standing in the doorway, watching her. He didn't look angry, but his expression was unreadable. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. Lena hesitated, unsure of how to answer. She couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. I was looking for a book," she stammered. "I got lost." He raised an eyebrow, a hint of skepticism in his eyes. "This section of the library is private." "I didn't realize," Lena said, her voice trembling slightly. He studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. He seemed to be weighing her words, trying to decide whether to believe her. "Come," he said finally, his voice softening slightly. "I'll show you the way out." He led her back to the main library, his presence close behind her. Lena felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. She'd been caught, but she'd also discovered something important, something that might help her understand her situation and perhaps even find a way out. As they reached the main section of the library, Niccolò stopped and turned to face her. "You're curious," he said, his voice a low murmur. "That's not necessarily a bad thing. But be careful, Valeria. Some secrets are best left buried." His words were a warning, but also, perhaps, an invitation. Lena felt a sudden surge of defiance. She wouldn't be intimidated. She wouldn't be controlled. She would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. "I'm not afraid of secrets," she said, her voice firm, her gaze meeting his. He smiled then, a slow, enigmatic smile that sent a shiver down her spine.
"Perhaps not," he said, "but you should be."
He turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing there, her mind racing. The serpent's dance of trust had begun. She had discovered a hidden world, a world of ancient secrets and dangerous rivalries. And she had, perhaps inadvertently, piqued Niccolò's interest. She was no longer just a pawn, she was a player, whether she wanted to be or not. She knew the risks were immense, that she was walking a tightrope, but she also felt a growing sense of determination. She would uncover the truth, she would understand the Moretti, and she would find a way to reclaim her freedom. The game was afoot, and she was ready to play. The secrets in the hidden room had ignited a spark within her, a determination to not just survive, but to understand, and perhaps even to control her own destiny. Chapter 7. Scars Beneath the Surface. The discovery of the hidden archive changed things, subtly at first, then more dramatically. Lena continued her routine, outwardly compliant, but inwardly, she was gathering information, piecing together the puzzle of the Moretti family and her place within it. She spent hours in the main library, ostensibly reading but actually observing, listening, learning. She noticed the small details, the nuances of behavior, the unspoken dynamics between Niccolò, Isabella, and the other members of the household staff. She learned that Isabella was more than just a housekeeper. She was Niccolò's confidant, his advisor, a woman who wielded considerable power behind the scenes. She also learned that the Moretti family was not as monolithic as it appeared. There were factions, rivalries, whispers of dissent within the ranks. One afternoon, while walking in the gardens, Lena encountered Marco, one of the younger guards, a man who had always seemed more approachable than the others. They exchanged pleasantries, and Lena, seizing the opportunity, casually steered the conversation towards the Moretti family history. Marco, flattered by her interest, proved to be a surprisingly valuable source of information. He spoke of Niccolò's father, a man known for his ruthlessness and his unwavering adherence to the old ways. He also spoke of Niccolò's mother, Isabella, confirming what Lena had read in the scrolls. She had been a strong, independent woman, loved by many, but also feared by some. She was different, Marco said, his voice low, almost reverent. She challenged the old ways. She wanted more. For Niccolò, for the family. And what happened to her? Lena asked, her voice carefully neutral. Marco hesitated, glancing around nervously.
It's not talked about, he said.
Officially, it was an accident. A car crash. But he trailed off, his expression troubled. But, Lena prompted gently. But there were whispers, Marco said, his voice barely above a whisper. Whispers of foul play. Of a betrayal. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. The whispers Marco spoke of echoed the cryptic references she'd found in the scrolls. It seemed increasingly likely that Niccolò's mother had been murdered, and that the truth had been carefully covered up. Later that evening, during dinner with Niccolò, Lena decided to take a risk. She'd noticed that he seemed more relaxed, more human, when they spoke of his mother. Marco told me about your mother, she said, her voice casual, as if it were a topic of no particular importance. Niccolò's expression hardened, his eyes turning cold. Marco shouldn't be discussing family matters with you, he said, his voice sharp. Lena met his gaze, unflinching. He said she was different. Niccolò's jaw tightened. He stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to Lena's surprise, he spoke. She was, he said, his voice softer now, tinged with a hint of sadness.
She believed in change.
She believed that the family could be more than just what it was. And your father? Lena asked, her voice gentle. Niccolò looked away, his gaze fixed on some distant point. He loved her, he said, his voice flat. But he couldn't understand her. He couldn't accept her ideas. Lena sensed a deep conflict within him, a struggle between his loyalty to his father and his love for his mother. She saw, for the first time, the scars beneath the surface, the emotional wounds that had shaped him. Do you believe it was an accident? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Niccolò didn't answer for a long time. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain that mirrored her own. I don't know, he said finally, his voice raw. I want to believe it was. But he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. It was a moment of profound vulnerability, a crack in his carefully constructed facade. Lena felt a surge of empathy for him, a connection that transcended their captor-captive relationship. She reached across the table and gently placed her hand over his. His skin was warm, his hand surprisingly strong. He didn't pull away. I understand, she said softly. The not knowing, it's the hardest part. He looked at her, his eyes searching. He seemed to be seeing her, truly seeing her for the first time. The silence stretched between them, no longer awkward, but filled with a shared understanding, a shared grief. The scars beneath the surface, both hers and his, were exposed, creating a fragile bond between them. It was a moment of unexpected intimacy, a turning point in their relationship. The serpent's dance was continuing, but the steps were changing, becoming less about power and control, and more about shared pain and a tentative, fragile trust. Lena knew she was playing a dangerous game, getting closer to a man who could destroy her, but she couldn't help herself. She was drawn to his vulnerability, to the hidden depths beneath his cold exterior. And she sensed that he, too, was drawn to her strength, to her resilience, to her understanding of the darkness that haunted him. The path ahead was still uncertain, still fraught with danger. But for the first time, Lena felt a glimmer of hope, a sense that she might not just survive, but perhaps even find a way to connect with the man who held her captive, and in doing so, perhaps even find a way to freedom. Chapter 8. A Glimmer of Forbidden Light. The tentative connection forged over shared grief began to subtly shift the dynamics between Lena and Nicolo. He remained her captor. The rules of her confinement remained in place, but the way he interacted with her softened, becoming less formal, less guarded. He started seeking her out, engaging her in conversations that went beyond the superficial. He asked her about her life before, about her dreams, about her hopes for the future, a future he controlled, yet seemed genuinely interested in understanding. One evening, he found her in the library, not in the hidden archive, but in the main section, reading a volume of poetry. He stood beside her, watching her silently for a moment before speaking. "Do you find solace in words, Valeria?" he asked, his voice a low murmur that blended with the quiet rustle of pages. Lena looked up, surprised by his gentle tone. "Sometimes," she admitted, "they can be a refuge." He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the book in her hands. "Poetry can reveal truths that prose cannot," he said. "It can speak to the soul." He reached out and gently took the book from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. He read the title, a collection of sonnets by Petrarch. "Love, loss, longing," he murmured, his voice thoughtful. "The eternal themes." He opened the book and began to read aloud, his voice rich and resonant, his Italian pronunciation flawless. He read with a passion, an understanding, that surprised Lena. She had never imagined him as a man who appreciated poetry, a man who could be moved by words of love and loss. As he read, Lena watched him, fascinated. The harsh lines of his face seemed to soften, his stormy eyes losing their coldness. He was, for a moment, not the ruthless capo, but a man touched by beauty, a man capable of deep emotion. When he finished reading, he closed the book and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Do you believe in love, Valeria?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. The question caught her off guard. She had loved, once, long ago, before the darkness had consumed her world. But that love had been shattered, leaving her scarred and wary. I don't know," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I used to."
"But now?"
he prompted gently. "Now, I believe in survival," she said, her voice firm. "In protecting oneself." He nodded slowly, his gaze searching. "Love can be a weakness," he said. "A vulnerability. In our world, it can be dangerous. But is it worth it?" Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. "To live without love, is that living at all?" He didn't answer for a long time. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a longing that mirrored her own. It was a forbidden longing, a dangerous desire, a flicker of light in the darkness that surrounded them. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. It was a tender gesture, a gesture that belied the power he held over her. Lena felt a shiver run through her, a mix of fear and something else, something she hadn't felt in years' desire. He leaned closer, his lips inches from hers. Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she should pull away, that this was wrong, that this was dangerous, but she couldn't move. She was caught in his gaze, mesmerized by his presence. He didn't kiss her. He simply held her gaze, his eyes searching, questioning. Then he straightened, his mask of detachment slipping back into place. "It's late," he said, his voice once again cool and impersonal. "You should go to bed." He turned and walked away, leaving Lena standing there, her body trembling, her mind reeling. The forbidden light had flickered, brighter than ever before, illuminating the dangerous path they were treading. She knew she was playing with fire, that this attraction, this connection, could destroy them both. But she couldn't deny it, couldn't suppress the longing that had awakened within her. As she lay in bed that night, she replayed the scene in her mind, his touch, his gaze, his words. She was falling for him, falling for her captor, falling for the man who held her fate in his hands. It was madness, it was reckless, it was utterly forbidden. But it was also, perhaps, the most real thing she'd felt in years. She was trapped in a cage, but a glimmer of light had appeared, a light that promised both danger and a terrifying, exhilarating possibility. She knew she should resist, that she should protect herself, but the pull was too strong, the desire too intense. She was walking a tightrope, balancing between survival and surrender, between fear and a forbidden love. And she had no idea where it would lead. Chapter 9. The Weight of Family Secrets. The unspoken tension between Lena and Nicolo thickened, a palpable current that charged the air whenever they were together. Their interactions became a delicate dance, a constant push and pull between attraction and restraint, between the roles they were forced to play and the emotions that simmered beneath the surface. Lena continued her investigation into the Moretti family history, spending hours in the hidden archive, poring over the ancient scrolls. She was determined to uncover the truth about Nicolo's mother's death, convinced that it held the key to understanding him, to understanding the darkness that haunted him. She discovered more details, cryptic references to a rival family, the Castellano, and a long-standing feud that had spanned generations. The scrolls hinted at a betrayal, a conspiracy, a plot that had cost Isabella Moretti her life. But the details were fragmented, incomplete, leaving Lena with more questions than answers. One afternoon, while exploring a different wing of the mansion, Lena stumbled upon a locked room. Curiosity piqued. She tried the door, but it was firmly secured. She noticed a small, almost invisible keyhole, hidden beneath an ornate carving. Remembering a small, antique key she'd found tucked away in a drawer in her room, a key that didn't seem to fit any of the other locks in the mansion, she retrieved it and returned to the locked room. To her surprise, the key fit perfectly. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding. She knew she was trespassing, that she was risking Nicolo's wrath, but her desire to uncover the truth was stronger than her fear. She slowly opened the door and stepped inside. The room was dark and dusty, the air thick with the scent of decay. It was a bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been left years ago. A large, four-poster bed dominated the room, draped in faded velvet. A dressing table stood against one wall, covered in a layer of dust. A portrait hung above the fireplace, depicting a beautiful woman with dark hair and striking green eyes, Isabella Moretti. Lena felt a chill run down her spine. This was Nicolo's mother's room, a shrine to a life cut short, a testament to a loss that still haunted the mansion. She began to explore the room, carefully examining the objects, searching for clues. She found a jewelry box filled with exquisite pieces, each one a testament to Isabella's refined taste. She found a diary, its pages filled with elegant handwriting, chronicling Isabella's thoughts, her dreams, her fears. As she read the diary, Lena began to piece together a clearer picture of Isabella's life. She had been a woman trapped in a world she didn't belong to, a woman who yearned for something more. She had loved her son fiercely, but she had also feared for his future, fearing that he would be consumed by the darkness of the family legacy. Lena found a passage that made her heart stop. Isabella had written of a growing suspicion, a fear that her husband was plotting against her, that he was planning to silence her, to prevent her from interfering with his plans. She had written of a secret, a dangerous secret that she had uncovered, a secret that could destroy the family. Lena felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. This was the proof she'd been looking for. Isabella hadn't died in an accident, she had been murdered, and her husband, Nicolo's father, had been responsible. A sound startled her. She quickly closed the diary and placed it back on the dressing table, her heart pounding. She turned to see Nicolo standing in the doorway, his expression dark and thunderous. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cold and hard. Lena's mind raced. She couldn't tell him the truth, not yet. She needed time to think, to plan. I was exploring, she stammered. "I didn't realize this room was off limits." His eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on her. He didn't believe her. He knew she was lying. "This room is private," he said, his voice dangerously low. You are not to come here again." He walked towards her, his presence overwhelming. He stopped just inches away, his eyes searching hers. "What were you looking for, Valeria?" he asked, his voice a soft, menacing whisper. Lena met his gaze, her fear mingling with a surge of defiance. She wouldn't be intimidated. She wouldn't be silenced. "The truth," she said, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her hands. His expression changed, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He hadn't expected her to be so bold, so direct. "The truth about what?" he asked, his voice still soft, but now tinged with a hint of curiosity. "The truth about your mother," Lena said, her voice unwavering. "The truth about how she died." His eyes widened, a flicker of pain crossing his face. He looked away, his jaw tightening. The weight of family secrets pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating. The room, a tomb of the past, held them captive in its silence. The truth, a dangerous weapon, lay between them, waiting to be wielded. Lena knew she was walking a dangerous path, challenging a powerful man, uncovering secrets that could destroy them both. But she couldn't turn back. She had come too far, seen too much. She had to know the truth, no matter the cost. And she had a feeling that Nicolo, despite his anger, despite his power, was also seeking the truth, searching for a way to escape the darkness that had haunted his family for generations. Chapter 10. Broken Vows and New Beginnings. The confrontation in Isabella's room hung heavy in the air between Lena and Nicolo. He hadn't punished her, hadn't lashed out in anger, as she'd expected. Instead, he'd withdrawn, becoming even more distant, more unreadable. The fragile connection they'd forged seemed to have shattered, replaced by a renewed tension, a sense of unspoken conflict. Lena, however, was more determined than ever to uncover the truth. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but she couldn't turn back. She had seen the pain in Nicolo's eyes, the flicker of vulnerability beneath his cold exterior. She believed that he, too, was a prisoner of his family's past, and that uncovering the truth might be the only way to free them both. She continued to study Isabella's diary, searching for more clues. She discovered a hidden compartment within the jewelry box containing a small, intricately carved key and a folded piece of paper. The paper contained a series of numbers and letters, a code of some kind. Lena recognized the key. It was similar to the one she'd used to open the hidden archive, but smaller, more ornate. She realized that it must unlock another secret room, another repository of hidden knowledge. She spent days searching the mansion, trying to find the lock that matched the key. Finally, she discovered it, hidden behind a tapestry in a rarely used hallway. The lock opened a small, concealed door, leading to a narrow, winding staircase that descended into darkness. Lena hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding. She knew she was taking a risk, that she was venturing into the unknown, but she couldn't stop herself. She had to know what secrets lay hidden below. She descended the staircase, her steps echoing in the silence. The air grew colder, damper, carrying the scent of earth and something else, something metallic, that made her stomach churn. The staircase opened into a small, underground chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with ancient artifacts, weapons, and documents. In the center of the room stood a large wooden chest, secured with a heavy lock that matched the key Lena held. She unlocked the chest and slowly opened it. Inside, she found a collection of documents, letters, and photographs, all carefully preserved. As she examined the contents, she began to piece together the final, horrifying truth about Isabella Moretti's death. The documents revealed a conspiracy, a plot orchestrated by Nicolo's father, Antonio Moretti, and his closest allies, including members of the rival Castellano family. They had feared Isabella's influence, her desire for change, her threat to their power. They had arranged her murder, making it look like an accident, silencing her forever. The letters were even more damning. They were written by Antonio Moretti himself, outlining the details of the plot, revealing his cold, calculating ruthlessness. The photographs were the most shocking. They showed Isabella, moments before her death, meeting with a member of the Castellano family, a man Lena recognized from the scrolls Riccardo Castellano, Antonio's sworn enemy, but also, secretly, his accomplice. Lena felt a wave of nausea wash over her. The truth was more horrific than she'd ever imagined. Niccolo's father had not only murdered his wife, but he had betrayed his own family, his own code, by allying with his enemies. She carefully gathered the documents, letters, and photographs, placing them back in the chest. She knew she had to show them to Niccolo, but she also knew that it would be a devastating blow, a revelation that would shatter his world. She made her way back up the staircase, her mind racing. She had to find a way to present the truth to him, to help him understand, to help him cope with the unimaginable betrayal. As she emerged from the hidden staircase, she found Niccolo waiting for her. He was standing in the hallway, his expression dark and unreadable. "I know you've been investigating," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I know you've been searching for the truth." Lena met his gaze, her heart pounding. She couldn't lie to him, not anymore. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have." "And what have you found?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lena took a deep breath. "I found the truth about your mother's death," she said, her voice unwavering. "She didn't die in an accident, Niccolo. She was murdered." His eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. Then, his expression hardened, his eyes turning cold. "Don't lie to me, Valeria," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I'm not lying," Lena said, her voice firm. "I have proof." She led him to her room and showed him the chest, the documents, the letters, the photographs. He examined them slowly, his hands trembling, his face growing paler with each passing moment. As he read his father's letters, his expression changed, morphing from disbelief to horror, to a profound, overwhelming grief. He sank into a chair, his body shaking, his eyes filled with tears. Lena knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his arm. She knew there were no words that could ease his pain, no way to undo the devastating truth. "I'm so sorry, Niccolo," she said softly. "I know this is unimaginable." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a raw, unbearable anguish. He killed her," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "My own father, he killed my mother. The vows of the family, the code of honor, all lay shattered." Lena held him as the tears came, a powerful, controlled man broken by the weight of his family's secrets. She spent that night tending his tears, offering comfort. For the first time, the barriers between them were no more. Lena knew that in the heart of that devastating revelation, a new beginning was stirring. Broken vows might pave the way for genuine bonds, forged not in obligation, but in shared pain and a mutual yearning for truth and, perhaps, even love. The future was uncertain, the path ahead still fraught with danger, but for the first time since her arrival at the Moretti mansion, Lena felt a sense of hope, a belief that they could, together, overcome the darkness and find a way to build a new life, a life free from the shadows of the past. The foundation of their relationship, built on debt and captivity, was crumbling, replaced by a fragile, nascent connection, born of shared grief and a mutual desire for truth and redemption. Chapter 11. A city veiled in deceit. The aftermath of the revelation was a period of intense emotional turmoil. Niccolo, shattered by the truth about his father, went through a range of emotions: grief, rage, denial, and finally, a grim determination to confront the legacy he had inherited. Lena remained by his side, offering support, understanding, and a quiet strength that surprised even herself. She had become his anchor, his confidant, the one person he could trust in a world built on lies and betrayal. He spent days locked in his study, poring over the documents Lena had found, absorbing the full extent of his father's treachery. He barely ate, barely slept, driven by a need to understand, to make sense of the shattered fragments of his past. Lena, meanwhile, began to plan their next move. She knew that simply exposing Antonio Moretti's crimes wouldn't be enough. The Castellano family was still a powerful force in the city, and they would undoubtedly retaliate. She needed to find a way to protect Niccolò, to protect themselves from the inevitable fallout. She started by researching the Castellano family, delving deeper into their history, their connections, their weaknesses. She discovered that Riccardo Castellano, the man who had colluded with Antonio Moretti in Isabella's murder, was now the head of the family, a ruthless and ambitious man who would stop at nothing to maintain his power. She also learned that the Castellano family was facing internal divisions, a power struggle between Riccardo and his younger brother, Alessandro. Alessandro was rumored to be more moderate, more open to change, less inclined to follow the brutal traditions of his family. Lena saw an opportunity. If she could somehow reach out to Alessandro, perhaps she could forge an alliance, a way to neutralize the threat posed by Riccardo and his followers. She knew it was a risky gamble, but she couldn't see any other way. She had to act, to protect Niccolò, to protect the fragile new beginning they had found together. One evening, after Niccolò had finally emerged from his self-imposed isolation, Lena presented her plan to him. He was still withdrawn, still grappling with the enormity of his father's betrayal, but he listened intently, his eyes fixed on her. "It's dangerous, Valeria," he said, his voice hoarse. "Contacting the Castellano, it could be a trap." "I know," Lena said, her voice firm. "But we have no choice. We can't just sit here and wait for Riccardo to make his move." "He'll kill us," Niccolò said, his voice flat. "He'll kill us both." "Maybe," Lena said. "But maybe not. Maybe Alessandro is different. Maybe he's looking for a way out, just like we are." Niccolò looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. He saw her strength, her determination, her unwavering loyalty. He had underestimated her, he realized. He had seen her as a pawn, a captive, but she was so much more. She was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who was willing to risk everything for him. "All right," he said finally, his voice regaining some of its former strength. "We'll do it. We'll contact Alessandro Castellano." They spent the next few days planning their strategy. They decided to use a trusted intermediary, a former associate of Niccolò's father who had fallen out of favor and was now living in hiding. This man, known only as Silvio, had a reputation for discretion and loyalty. Lena, using her knowledge of the city's underworld, managed to track down Silvio's location. She and Niccolò met with him in a secluded cafe, a place where they could be sure they wouldn't be overheard. Silvio was wary at first, suspicious of their motives, but Lena's sincerity and Niccolò's determination eventually convinced him to help. He agreed to deliver a message to Alessandro Castellano, a message outlining their proposal for a meeting. The waiting was agonizing. Days turned into nights, and still there was no response. Lena and Niccolò were on edge, constantly watching, constantly waiting for Riccardo's inevitable retaliation. The city, once a familiar backdrop to their lives, now felt like a dangerous labyrinth, veiled in deceit and treachery. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat. Every whisper seemed to carry a warning. Finally, a message arrived. Alessandro Castellano had agreed to meet. The meeting was set for the following night, in a neutral location, a small, abandoned church on the outskirts of the city. Lena and Niccolò prepared, knowing it was a move that could crumble the old alliances, or end them entirely. They were stepping into a world of shadows and whispers where every corner hid a potential enemy. The city itself was a character in their drama, its ancient stones and hidden alleyways bearing witness to generations of secrets, betrayals, and power struggles. The weight of that history pressed down on them, a reminder of the dangerous game they were playing. But they were no longer alone. They had each other, a fragile bond forged in the crucible of shared pain and a mutual desire for truth and redemption. And they had a plan, a risky gamble that could either save them or destroy them. The city held its breath, waiting to see which path they would choose, which fate would befall them. Chapter 12. The Price of Protection. The abandoned church stood silhouetted against the night sky, a crumbling testament to a forgotten faith. Its stained glass windows were shattered, its stone walls scarred by time and neglect. It was a fitting location for a clandestine meeting, a place where secrets could be shared and alliances forged or broken. Lena and Nicolo arrived separately, taking precautions to avoid being followed. Lena went first, slipping through the darkened streets, her senses on high alert. She entered the church through a side door, the rusty hinges groaning in protest. The interior was dark and cavernous, the air thick with the scent of dust and decay. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting eerie shadows across the floor. She waited, her heart pounding, her hand resting on the small, concealed weapon she carried. She had insisted on being armed, despite Nicolo's objections. She wouldn't be defenseless, not anymore. Nicolo arrived a few minutes later, his presence filling the space. He moved with a quiet grace, his eyes scanning the shadows, his hand never far from the gun he carried beneath his jacket. They stood together, in silence, waiting. The tension was palpable, the air thick with anticipation and fear. They were risking everything, stepping into a world of shadows and uncertainty. A sound startled them. A figure emerged from the darkness, followed by two others. It was Alessandro Castellano, younger than Lena had expected, with a face that bore a striking resemblance to his brother, but with a softer, less hardened expression. "Moretti," Alessandro said, his voice low and cautious. He nodded towards Lena. "And you are?" "Valeria Marchesi," Lena said, her voice firm. "A friend of Nicolo's." Alessandro studied her for a moment, his eyes assessing. He seemed to sense the unspoken connection between her and Nicolo, the bond that went beyond mere friendship. "Silvio delivered your message," Alessandro said, turning his attention back to Nicolo. "You claim to have information about my brother. About Isabella Moretti's death." Nicolo nodded, his expression grim. "We do. And it's not what you've been told." He proceeded to outline the details of the conspiracy, revealing the truth about Antonio Moretti's treachery, his alliance with Riccardo, the carefully orchestrated murder. He showed Alessandro the documents, the letters, the photographs, the irrefutable proof of his father's guilt. Alessandro listened in silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. He examined the evidence, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at Nicolo, his eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and horror. This changes everything," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I had suspicions. But I never imagined your brother is a dangerous man," Alessandro, Lena said, her voice firm. "He won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in his way. Including you." Alessandro nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. He knew she was right. He had always lived in his brother's shadow, fearing his power, fearing his ruthlessness. "What do you propose?" he asked, looking up at Nicolo. "An alliance," Nicolo said. "We help each other. We expose Riccardo. We dismantle his power. We break the cycle of violence that has plagued our families for generations." Alessandro hesitated for a moment, weighing the risks, weighing the consequences. He knew that aligning himself with Nicolo and Lena would be a betrayal of his own family, a violation of the code he had been raised to uphold. But he also knew that it was the only way to escape his brother's control, the only way to build a different future. "I agree," he said, finally, his voice firm. "I will help you." A wave of relief washed over Lena. They had done it. They had forged an alliance, a fragile, dangerous alliance, but an alliance nonetheless. "There's a price," Alessandro added, his voice turning serious. Nicolo and Lena exchanged a look. They had expected this. There was always a price.
"What is it?"
Nicolo asked. "Protection," Alessandro said. "My brother has eyes and ears everywhere. He'll know about this meeting. He'll come after me." "We'll protect you," Nicolo said, his voice unwavering. "You have my word." "Your word is not enough," Alessandro said. "I need insurance." He looked at Lena, his eyes holding a silent plea. Lena understood. He wanted her. He wanted her as collateral, as a guarantee of their loyalty, as a hostage. Lena met his gaze, her heart pounding. She knew what she had to do. She had to sacrifice herself, to put herself at risk, to protect Nicolo, to protect their future. "I'll go with you," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear that churned within her. Nicolo's eyes widened in disbelief. He started to protest, but Lena silenced him with a look. "It's the only way, Nicolo," she said softly. "It's the price of protection." Nicolo looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anguish and admiration.
He knew she was right.
He knew he couldn't refuse. "Valeria," he began, his voice choked with emotion. "I'll be all right," Lena said, trying to reassure him, trying to reassure herself. "I trust you. I trust Alessandro." Alessandro nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his face. "You have my word, Signorina Marchesi," he said. "You will be safe." Lena and Alessandro left the church together, disappearing into the darkness. Nicolo remained behind, watching them go, his heart filled with a profound sense of loss and a burning determination. He had lost her, again, but this time it was her choice, her sacrifice. And he would not let her sacrifice be in vain. He would honor his promise, he would protect Alessandro, he would dismantle Ricardo's power, and he would bring Lena home. The price of protection had been paid, and the game had shifted once more. Lena was now a pawn in a different game, a game played between rival brothers, a game of survival and betrayal. But she was not just a pawn, she was a player, a strong, resilient woman who had chosen her own path, who had willingly put herself at risk for the man she loved. And Nicolo, fueled by his love for her, by his grief for his mother, and by his determination to break free from the darkness of his past, was ready to fight, to protect his alliance, to reclaim his future, and to bring the woman he loved back to his side. Chapter 13. Unmasking the Enemy Within. Lena's departure with Alessandro left a gaping void in the Moretti mansion and in Nicolo's life. He found himself wandering the halls, feeling her absence in every room, every corridor. The silence, once a suffocating presence, now echoed with the ghost of her voice, her laughter, her quiet strength. He threw himself into the task at hand, working tirelessly with Alessandro to gather evidence, to build a case against Ricardo. They met in secret, communicating through encrypted messages, always aware of the danger, of the possibility of betrayal. Alessandro, despite his initial reservations, proved to be a valuable ally. He provided Nicolo with inside information about Ricardo's operations, his connections, his weaknesses. He revealed the extent of Ricardo's ruthlessness, his paranoia, his growing instability. Nicolo learned that Ricardo had been suspicious of him for some time, suspecting his involvement with Lena, suspecting his disloyalty to the family. He had placed spies within the Moretti household, watching Nicolo's every move, reporting back to him. This revelation sent a chill down Nicolo's spine. He realized that he was surrounded by enemies, that he couldn't trust anyone, not even those he had considered loyal for years. He decided to conduct his own internal investigation, carefully vetting his staff, searching for any sign of treachery. He discovered that Isabella, his trusted housekeeper, his confidant, the woman who had been like a second mother to him, was one of Ricardo's spies. The betrayal cut him deeply. He had trusted Isabella implicitly, had confided in her, had relied on her for advice and support. He couldn't understand how she could betray him, how she could align herself with the man who had murdered his mother. He confronted her, his voice cold and hard, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and pain. Isabella didn't deny it. She admitted her involvement with Ricardo, claiming that she had been forced to cooperate, that he had threatened her family. "He has something on me, Nicolo," she said, her voice trembling. "Something from the past. Something that could destroy me." Nicolo didn't believe her. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw something else, a flicker of guilt, a hint of shame. He realized that her betrayal ran deeper than she was willing to admit. He had her placed under house arrest, confined to her quarters, while he investigated further. He discovered that Isabella had been involved in his mother's death, not directly, but as an accomplice. She had known about Antonio's plot, had helped to cover it up, had remained silent for years. The weight of this revelation was almost unbearable. He had lost his mother, his father, and now, the woman he had considered a surrogate mother, all to the same web of lies and betrayal. He felt utterly alone, surrounded by enemies, unsure of who he could trust. But he also felt a renewed sense of determination. He would not be defeated. He would expose the truth. He would dismantle Ricardo's power, and he would avenge his mother's death. He received a message from Alessandro. Lena was safe, but Ricardo was growing increasingly suspicious. He was planning a move, a strike against Niccolò, a final attempt to eliminate the threat he posed. Niccolò knew he had to act quickly. He had to gather his remaining loyal allies, prepare for the inevitable confrontation. He had to unmask the enemy within, before it was too late. He sent word to a few he still trusted, outlining a time to strike, a final move. The Moretti mansion, which was once a majestic home, was now the epicenter of a brewing war. He knew that the coming days would be a test, a trial by fire. He was fighting not just for his own survival, but for the future of his family, for the legacy he had inherited, for the woman he loved. He was fighting to break free from the darkness, to reclaim his life, to build a new beginning. The enemy was within, and he was ready to face them, to expose them, to defeat them. The time for whispers and shadows was over. The time for action had come. Chapter 14. Flames of Rebellion and Desire. Life within the Castellano household was a tense, suffocating experience for Lena. She was treated with a strained courtesy, a mixture of suspicion and respect. Alessandro kept his word, ensuring her safety, but she was constantly aware of being watched, of being a prisoner in a different kind of gilded cage. She spent her days observing, learning, gathering information. She befriended some of the servants, subtly questioning them about Ricardo, about his plans, about the internal dynamics of the family. She learned that Ricardo was becoming increasingly paranoid, increasingly erratic. He was losing control, lashing out at anyone he perceived as a threat. She also learned that Alessandro was genuinely committed to change, to breaking the cycle of violence that had plagued his family for generations. He was gathering support among the younger members of the family, those who were disillusioned with Ricardo's brutal rule. Lena knew that she had to find a way to communicate with Niccolò, to let him know what she had learned, to coordinate their efforts. She managed to send a coded message through a trusted servant, a message outlining Ricardo's plans and Alessandro's growing support. One evening, Alessandro invited her to dine with him. It was an unusual gesture, a sign that he was beginning to trust her, to see her as more than just a hostage. They ate in a small, private dining room, the atmosphere surprisingly relaxed. Alessandro spoke openly about his fears, his hopes, his desire for a different future. "I never wanted this life, Valeria," he said, his voice filled with a quiet sadness. "I never wanted to be a part of this darkness." Lena looked at him, her heart filled with empathy. She saw the pain in his eyes, the burden he carried. She saw a man trapped by his family's legacy, just like Niccolò. "There's always a choice, Alessandro," she said softly. "We can always choose a different path." He smiled sadly. "It's not that simple, Valeria. Not in our world. It can be," Lena insisted. "We can make it simple. We can choose to break free." He looked at her, his eyes searching. He saw her strength, her determination, her unwavering belief in the possibility of change. He saw a woman who had suffered, who had been betrayed, but who had not lost her hope, her spirit. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. His touch was warm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You remind me of her," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Of Isabella." Lena's heart skipped a beat. It was the second time she'd been compared to Niccolò's mother. It was a strange, unsettling connection, a link to a past she was only beginning to understand. I don't know what to say," she stammered. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You don't need to say anything, Valeria," he said. "Just be yourself." The tenderness was broken almost immediately. A servant burst into the room, his face pale with fear. "Signore Castellano," he gasped. "Ricardo, he knows. He's coming." Alessandro's expression hardened, his eyes turning cold. He stood up, his hand reaching for the gun he carried beneath his jacket. "It's time," he said, his voice firm. Lena stood up, her heart pounding. She knew this was it, the moment of truth, the final confrontation. They left the dining room, moving quickly through the corridors of the mansion. They could hear the sounds of shouting, of gunfire, of chaos erupting around them. They reached the main entrance hall, just as Ricardo and his men stormed inside. The two groups faced each other, a tense standoff, a prelude to violence. Ricardo was a terrifying figure, his face contorted with rage, his eyes burning with hatred. He looked at Alessandro, his expression filled with disgust. "You traitor," he spat. "You dare to betray your own family?" "I'm not betraying my family, Ricardo," Alessandro said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm saving it."
"From you."
Ricardo laughed, a harsh, guttural sound. "You're weak, Alessandro," he said. "You always were. You're not fit to lead." He turned his attention to Lena, his eyes narrowing. "And you," he said, his voice filled with venom. "You're the reason for all this. You're the one who poisoned Nicolo's mind." Lena met his gaze, unflinching. "I didn't poison his mind, Ricardo," she said. "I opened his eyes to the truth." Ricardo raised his gun, pointing it directly at Lena. "You're going to die, whore," he said. "You and your lover both." Before he could pull the trigger, Alessandro stepped in front of Lena, shielding her with his body. "No, Ricardo," he said, his voice firm. "You're not going to kill her. You're not going to kill anyone else." A shot rang out. Alessandro staggered, clutching his chest. He fell to the ground, his body convulsing. Lena screamed, rushing to his side. She knelt beside him, cradling his head in her arms. She could see the blood spreading across his shirt, staining the white fabric a crimson red.
"Alessandro," she cried.
"No, please don't die." He looked at her, his eyes filled with pain, but also with a strange sense of peace. "It's all right, Valeria," he whispered. I did the right thing." His eyes closed, his body went limp. He was gone. Lena felt a surge of grief, a profound sense of loss. She had lost another ally, another friend, another victim of the endless cycle of violence. She looked up at Ricardo, her eyes burning with rage. "You monster," she hissed. "You killed him. You killed your own brother." Ricardo smiled, a cold, cruel smile.
"He was weak," he said. "He deserved to die."
Before he could say anything more, the doors of the mansion burst open again. Nicolo stormed inside, followed by his loyal men. He saw Lena, kneeling beside Alessandro's body, her face stained with tears. He saw Ricardo, standing over her, his gun still smoking. "Valeria!" he shouted, his voice filled with anguish and rage. He rushed towards her, his men engaging Ricardo's in a fierce firefight. The hall erupted in chaos, a maelstrom of gunfire, shouting, and violence. The flames of rebellion met a surge of desire. Nicolo moved toward Lena, fueled not just by duty, but something far more primal. Lena stood up, her eyes fixed on Nicolo. She saw the love in his eyes, the fear, the determination. She knew that he would fight for her, that he would die for her, and she would do the same for him. The rebellion had ignited, and the desire, the forbidden love, burned brighter than ever before. The mansion, a symbol of their captivity, had become a battlefield, a place where their fate would be decided. Chapter 15. A test of loyalty and love. The clash between Nicolo's and Ricardo's men was brutal and swift. The grand hall of the Castellano mansion, once a symbol of power and prestige, became a scene of carnage. Gunfire echoed through the vaulted ceilings, mingling with the cries of the wounded and the dying. Nicolo fought his way towards Lena, his movements precise and deadly. He was a force of nature, driven by a primal need to protect the woman he loved. He took down Ricardo's men with ruthless efficiency, his eyes constantly searching for Lena, his heart pounding with fear for her safety. Lena, despite her grief over Alessandro's death, was not passive. She retrieved Alessandro's dropped gun, her hand steady despite the chaos around her. She had learned to survive, to fight, to defend herself. She would not be a victim, not anymore. She fired at Ricardo's men, her aim surprisingly accurate. She managed to take down 2 of them, providing cover for Niccolò as he advanced. She was a warrior, a survivor, a woman who had found her strength in the heart of darkness. Riccardo, seeing his men falling, his power crumbling, became increasingly desperate. He grabbed Lena, holding her hostage, his gun pressed against her temple. "Stop, Moretti," he shouted, his voice hoarse with rage. "Or I kill her." Niccolò froze, his heart stopping in his chest. He saw the terror in Lena's eyes, but he also saw her courage, her defiance. He knew she wouldn't break, wouldn't beg, wouldn't surrender. "Let her go, Riccardo," Niccolò said, his voice cold and controlled. "This is between you and me." Riccardo laughed, a crazed, hysterical sound. "You think I'm afraid of you, Moretti?" He sneered. "You're nothing. You're weak, just like your mother." The mention of his mother, the woman Riccardo had helped to murder, ignited a fury within Niccolò. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. "You're the weak one, Riccardo," Niccolò said, his voice dangerously low. "Hiding behind a woman, threatening her life. You're a coward." Riccardo's grip on Lena tightened, his finger tightening on the trigger. "I'll kill her, Moretti," he threatened. "I swear I will." Lena looked at Niccolò, her eyes conveying a silent message. "Do it. Don't hesitate. End this." Niccolò understood. He knew what he had to do. He had to take the shot, even if it meant risking Lena's life. He had to end this, once and for all. He raised his gun, his hand steady, his aim unwavering. He focused on Riccardo, his eyes locking with his. He saw the fear in Riccardo's eyes, the realization that he had lost, that he was about to die. Time seemed to slow down. Niccolò took a deep breath, his finger tightening on the trigger. He was about to pull the trigger when a shot rang out, not from his gun but from somewhere else. Riccardo gasped, his eyes widening in surprise. He released Lena, his body slumping to the ground. He was dead. Niccolò and Lena looked around, trying to see who had fired the shot. They saw Isabella, standing at the top of the grand staircase, a smoking gun in her hand. Isabella, the woman who had betrayed them, had saved them. She had redeemed herself, in a final act of loyalty, a final act of atonement. She looked at Niccolò, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, Niccolò," she whispered. "For everything." Niccolò rushed to Lena, pulling her into his arms. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, his body trembling with relief. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm fine," Lena said, her voice steady, despite the ordeal she had just been through. "It's over. It's finally over." The remaining Castellano men, seeing their leader dead, surrendered. The fighting ceased. The silence that descended was deafening, broken only by the soft sobs of Isabella. Niccolò and Lena stood together, in the midst of the carnage, their love a beacon of hope in the darkness. They had survived. They had faced their demons, they had overcome their enemies, they had found their way back to each other. The test of loyalty and love had been passed. They had proven their commitment to each other, their willingness to sacrifice everything for each other. They had emerged from the crucible, stronger, more resilient, more deeply in love than ever before. The future was still uncertain, but they would face it together, hand in hand, their love a shield against the darkness, a promise of a new beginning. Chapter 16. The Heart's Reckoning. The immediate aftermath of the battle at the Castellano mansion was a blur of activity. Police arrived, alerted by the sounds of gunfire. They took statements, collected evidence, arrested the surviving Castellano men. Isabella, her confession echoing in the now silent halls, was taken into custody, her fate uncertain. Lena and Niccolò, amidst the chaos, found a quiet corner, clinging to each other, the reality of their survival sinking in. Niccolò insisted on having Lena examined by a doctor, despite her protests that she was unharmed. He hovered anxiously, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and concern, until the doctor confirmed that she was indeed physically fine, just shaken. They returned to the Moretti mansion, a place that had once been a gilded cage for Lena, but now felt different. It was still a symbol of a dark past, but it was also a place where they had found each other, where they had fought for their future. The mansion was eerily quiet. The staff, many of whom had been complicit in Ricardo's schemes, had been dismissed. Only a handful of trusted individuals remained, those who had proven their loyalty to Nicolo. Lena and Nicolo spent the following days trying to make sense of everything that had happened. They talked for hours, sharing their fears, their hopes, their dreams for the future. They mourned Alessandro, a man who had died trying to break free from the cycle of violence. They grieved for Isabella, a woman trapped by her past who had ultimately chosen redemption, even at the cost of her own freedom. Nicolo, freed from the burden of his father's legacy, began to make changes. He severed ties with the remaining criminal elements of the Moretti organization, determined to transform the family business into something legitimate, something honorable. He used his wealth and influence to support the community, to create opportunities, to atone for the sins of the past. Lena, by his side, was his constant support, his advisor, his partner in this new endeavor. She had found her purpose, her calling, in helping him to build a better future, a future free from the shadows of the Mafia. One evening, as they sat together on the terrace, overlooking the city lights, Nicolo turned to Lena, his eyes filled with a profound love. "Valeria," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with emotion. "I owe you everything. You saved my life. You showed me the truth. You gave me hope." Lena smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "You saved me too, Nicolo," she said. "You gave me a reason to fight, a reason to believe and love again." He squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering. "I love you, Valeria," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I love you more than words can say." Lena's heart overflowed with love. She had never thought it possible to feel this way again, to feel this depth of emotion, this sense of belonging. "I love you too, Nicolo," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "With all my heart." He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was both passionate and tender, a kiss that sealed their love, their commitment, their future together. It was a kiss that spoke of shared pain, of overcoming adversity, of finding redemption in each other's arms. As they held each other, under the starry sky, they knew that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, obstacles to overcome, but they would face them together, their love a guiding light, a source of strength, a promise of a brighter tomorrow. The heart's reckoning had been made. They had chosen love over fear, hope over despair, truth over lies. They had broken free from the chains of the past, and they were ready to embrace the future, a future filled with possibilities, a future built on love, trust, and a shared commitment to building a better world. The city below them, once a symbol of darkness and deceit, now seemed to shimmer with hope, a reflection of the love that burned brightly between them. Chapter 17. Blood on the Cobblestones. Despite the progress Nicolo and Lena made in transforming the Moretti legacy, the ghosts of the past were not so easily laid to rest. The city, steeped in decades of Mafia tradition and vendettas, held its breath, watching, waiting. Old rivalries simmered beneath the surface, and there were those who saw Nicolo's attempts at reform as a sign of weakness, an opportunity to seize power. One crisp autumn evening, Nicolo and Lena attended a charity gala, an event designed to showcase the Moretti family's new commitment to philanthropy. It was a glittering affair, filled with the city's elite, a carefully orchestrated display of unity and progress. Lena wore a stunning gown, a deep emerald green that complemented her dark hair and striking eyes. Nicolo, in a tailored tuxedo, looked every bit the powerful, reformed leader he was striving to be. They moved through the crowd, greeting guests, exchanging pleasantries, projecting an image of confidence and control. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. Nicolo was aware of the whispers, the watchful eyes, the subtle undercurrent of threat. He knew that there were those in attendance who wished him ill, who would be happy to see him fail, to see him fall. As they were standing on the balcony, overlooking the city skyline, a figure approached them. It was Marco, the young guard Lena had befriended in the Moretti Gardens, the one who had confided in her about Isabella's past. He looked pale and agitated, his eyes darting nervously around. "Signore Moretti," he said, his voice low and urgent.
"I need to speak with you. Alone."
Niccolò glanced at Lena, a silent exchange of concern passing between them. He nodded to Marco, leading him to a secluded corner of the balcony. "What is it, Marco?" Niccolò asked, his voice guarded. "There's been a development," Marco stammered. "A threat. Against you. Against Signorina Marchesi." Niccolò's expression hardened.
"Who?"
It's difficult to say," Marco said, his voice trembling. "There are rumors, whispers, of a coalition, of old enemies uniting against you." "Names, Marco," Niccolò said, his voice sharp. "I need names." Marco hesitated, his eyes filled with fear. "Castellano loyalists," he said finally. "And others. From other families. Those who resent your changes." Niccolò's blood ran cold. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't anticipated a full-scale coalition. He knew that he was walking a tightrope, that one wrong move could plunge him and Lena back into the darkness. "They're planning something," Marco continued. "Tonight. Here. At the gala." Niccolò's mind raced. He had to act quickly, to protect Lena, to protect himself. He had to find a way to neutralize the threat before it was too late. He thanked Marco, instructing him to remain vigilant, to alert him to any further developments. He returned to Lena, his expression carefully composed. "Is everything all right?" Lena asked, her eyes searching his. "It's complicated," Niccolò said, his voice evasive. "I need to take care of something." He didn't want to alarm her, not yet. He wanted to assess the situation, to formulate a plan. But Lena saw through his facade. She knew him too well, knew the subtle signs of his concern, his tension. "Tell me, Niccolò," she insisted. "What's going on?" He hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell her the truth. He couldn't keep her in the dark, not anymore. She deserved to know the risks, to be a part of the decisions that would affect their lives. He explained the situation, outlining Marco's warning, the threat posed by the coalition of enemies. Lena listened intently, her face growing pale, but her expression remaining resolute. "We need to leave," she said, her voice firm.
"Now."
Niccolò shook his head. "Not yet," he said. "I can't just run. It would show weakness. It would embolden them. But it's too dangerous, Niccolò," Lena pleaded. "We need to get to safety." "I have to confront them," Niccolò said, his voice determined. "I have to show them that I'm not afraid, that I won't be intimidated." Before Lena could argue further, a commotion erupted inside the ballroom. Shouts, screams, the shattering of glass. The gala, a symbol of peace and progress, had descended into chaos. Niccolò and Lena rushed inside, pushing their way through the panicked crowd. They saw a group of armed men, masked and dressed in black, storming through the ballroom, firing their weapons indiscriminately. It was an ambush, a coordinated attack, designed to eliminate Niccolò and Lena, to send a message to anyone who dared to challenge the old order. Niccolò pulled Lena behind him, shielding her with his body. He drew his own weapon, returning fire, his movements precise and deadly. He was a warrior, fighting for his life, fighting for the woman he loved. Lena, despite her fear, remained calm. She retrieved a small, concealed weapon she had insisted on carrying, hidden within the folds of her gown. She fired at the attackers, her aim surprisingly accurate, her hand steady. The ballroom became a battlefield, a scene of violence and chaos. The glittering chandeliers shattered, the elegant furniture was overturned, the blood of the innocent and the guilty stained the marble floors. Niccolò and Lena fought side by side, their love a shield against the darkness, their courage a testament to their commitment to each other. They were a force to be reckoned with, a couple united against their enemies, fighting for their survival, fighting for their future. The cobblestones outside, where guests had arrived in hope, were soon to be stained with blood, a stark reminder of the brutal reality that lurked beneath the city's veneer of civility. The attack, a desperate attempt to reclaim power, had ignited a war, a final showdown between the old and the new, between darkness and light. And Nicolo and Lena were at the heart of it, their love a beacon of hope in the midst of the storm. Chapter 18. The Lioness Unleashed. The chaos in the ballroom intensified. Nicolo and Lena, back to back, fought with a desperate courage, their movements synchronized, their trust in each other absolute. They were outnumbered but not outmatched. Nicolo's years of training, his innate fighting skills, were on full display. Lena, fueled by a fierce protectiveness and a newfound strength, proved to be a formidable ally. As they fought, Lena noticed a pattern in the attackers' movements. They were focused primarily on Nicolo, trying to isolate him, to take him down. She realized that she was a secondary target, a means to an end. She saw an opportunity. If she could draw their attention, divert their focus, she could give Nicolo a chance to break free, to gain the upper hand. "Nicolo," she shouted, her voice clear and strong above the din of the battle. "Cover me. I'm going to draw them away." Before he could protest, she dashed out from behind him, running towards the center of the ballroom, firing her weapon as she went. She was a lioness unleashed, fearless and determined, drawing the attention of the attackers like a moth to a flame. Several of the masked men turned their attention to her, pursuing her as she weaved through the overturned tables and shattered glass. She was fast, agile, her movements graceful yet deadly. She used the environment to her advantage, ducking behind pillars, using the furniture as cover, making herself a difficult target. Nicolo, seeing Lena's bold move, understood her strategy. He used the distraction to his advantage, picking off the remaining attackers with swift, precise shots. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of controlled fury, driven by a primal need to protect the woman he loved. Lena, however, was running out of space. She was cornered, surrounded by several attackers, their weapons trained on her. She knew she was in a precarious situation, that one wrong move could be her last. But she didn't falter. She didn't surrender. She stood her ground, her weapon raised, her eyes filled with defiance. "You'll have to kill me," she said, her voice steady and strong. "I won't be taken alive." The attackers hesitated, surprised by her boldness, by her unwavering courage. They had expected her to cower, to beg, to plead for her life. But she was not a victim. She was a warrior. Before they could react, Nicolo appeared, his face a mask of rage. He had cleared the remaining attackers, and he was now focused solely on protecting Lena. He charged towards the men surrounding her, his weapon blazing. He took them down with brutal efficiency, his movements swift and deadly. He was a whirlwind of violence, a protector, a lover, a man driven by a primal need to save the woman he loved. When the last attacker fell, Nicolo rushed to Lena, pulling her into his arms. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, his body trembling with relief. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine," Lena said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Thanks to you." They stood there, in the midst of the carnage, their love a beacon of hope in the darkness. They had survived, again. They had faced their enemies, they had fought for their lives, and they had emerged victorious. But the battle was far from over. The attack on the gala was a clear message, a declaration of war. Nicolo and Lena knew that they would have to be more vigilant than ever, that their enemies would not rest until they were defeated. They left the ballroom, stepping out into the cool night air. The city, once a symbol of hope and progress, now seemed to throb with a hidden menace. The cobblestones outside, where elegant guests had arrived just hours before, were stained with blood, a stark reminder of the violence that had erupted. Lena looked at Nicolo, her eyes filled with a mixture of love and concern. "What do we do now?" she asked. Nicolo's expression was grim, his jaw set with determination. "We fight back," he said, his voice cold and hard. "We expose them. We dismantle their power. We finish this, once and for all." The lioness had been unleashed, and the lion stood beside her, ready to protect her, to fight alongside her, to build a new future, a future free from the shadows of the past. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. And they were ready to face it, together, their love a weapon, their courage a shield, their determination unwavering. Chapter 19. A Haven in the Storm. The attack on the gala forced Niccolò and Lena to reassess their situation. They could no longer stay at the Moretti mansion, a symbol of the past they were trying to escape, and now a clear target for their enemies. They needed a safe haven, a place where they could regroup, plan their next move, and protect themselves from further attacks. Niccolò decided to take Lena to a secluded villa he owned, nestled in the hills overlooking the city. It was a place he had rarely used, a retreat from the pressures of his former life, a place he had once considered escaping to, but never had the courage to embrace. They left the city under the cover of darkness, escorted by a small, trusted team of guards. The drive was tense, every shadow seeming to conceal a potential threat, every passing car a possible enemy. The villa was a stark contrast to the opulent Moretti mansion. It was smaller, more intimate, built of stone and wood, blending seamlessly into the surrounding landscape. It was a place of peace and tranquility, a refuge from the chaos and violence of the city. When they arrived, Lena was struck by the beauty of the setting. The air was fresh and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. The view from the terrace was breathtaking, the city lights twinkling below like a scattered constellation. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice filled with awe. Niccolò smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "It is," he agreed. "It's always been a place of peace for me, a place where I could escape." "And now?" Lena asked, her eyes searching his. "Now," he said, his voice soft, "it's a place where we can be safe. Together." They settled into the villa, the silence a welcome change from the constant tension of the city. They spent their days exploring the surrounding hills, walking hand in hand through the forests, breathing in the fresh air, finding solace in the beauty of nature. They talked, sharing their fears, their hopes, their dreams for the future. They spoke of building a new life, a life free from violence, a life built on love, trust, and respect. Niccolò began to make plans, using his network of contacts to gather information, to identify the leaders of the coalition that had attacked them. He was determined to expose them, to dismantle their power, to bring them to justice. Lena, by his side, was his constant support, his advisor, his partner in this new endeavor. She used her intelligence, her intuition, her knowledge of the city's underworld to help him, to guide him, to protect him. One evening, as they sat together on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Niccolò turned to Lena, his eyes filled with a profound love. "I never thought I could be happy, Valeria," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with emotion. "I never thought I could escape the darkness. But you showed me the way. You gave me hope." Lena smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "You did it yourself, Niccolò," she said. "You chose to change. You chose to fight for a better future." He squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering. "But I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "You are my strength, my inspiration, my love." He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that was both passionate and tender, a kiss that sealed their love, their commitment, their future together. It was a kiss that spoke of shared pain, of overcoming adversity, of finding redemption in each other's arms. As they held each other, under the vast, starry sky, they knew that the storm was not yet over. There would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But they were ready to face them, together, their love a shield against the darkness, a promise of a brighter tomorrow. The haven in the hills was a temporary respite, a place to gather strength, to plan, to prepare for the final confrontation. But it was also a place where their love deepened, where their bond strengthened, where their commitment to each other was reaffirmed. They were a team, a partnership, a force to be reckoned with, ready to face whatever the future held, their love a beacon of hope in a world still shrouded in shadows. They had found a sanctuary, not just in the physical space of the villa, but in each other's arms, a haven where their love could flourish, where their spirits could heal, and where they could prepare for the final battle that lay ahead. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. The time for hiding was over. Nico Lowe, with Lena's unwavering support, had gathered enough intelligence to identify the key players behind the attack at the gala. It was a consortium of old guard mafia families, resistant to his reforms and desperate to reclaim their power. They were led by a ruthless capo named Don Angelo Rossi, a man known for his brutality and his unwavering adherence to the old ways. Nico Lowe knew that a direct confrontation was inevitable. He couldn't dismantle their power from the shadows. He had to face them, expose them, and bring them to justice. He planned a strategic move, a carefully orchestrated operation designed to cripple their organization and bring their leaders to account. He reached out to his remaining allies, those who had remained loyal despite the risks. He also secured the cooperation of the city's police commissioner, a man who had grown disillusioned with the corruption that had plagued the force for decades. Lena, despite Nico Lowe's concerns for her safety, insisted on being involved. She would not be sidelined, not this time. She had fought alongside him. She had risked her life for him, and she would stand by his side until the very end. The plan was set in motion. Nico Lowe's forces, along with the police, launched a series of coordinated raids on the coalition's strongholds, seizing assets, arresting key members, and gathering evidence of their crimes. The operation was a success, crippling the coalition's operations and sending a clear message that Nico Lowe was not to be trifled with. But Don Rossi, the mastermind behind the attack, remained at large. Nico Lowe knew that the final confrontation would be with Rossi himself. He received intelligence that Rossi was hiding in an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place where he had once conducted his most brutal business. Nico Lowe and Lena, along with a small, trusted team, prepared to confront Rossi. They knew it would be a dangerous mission, that Rossi would be heavily guarded, that the odds were stacked against them. But they were ready. They had come too far, sacrificed too much, to turn back now. They arrived at the warehouse under the cover of darkness. The building was a hulking, ominous silhouette against the night sky, a symbol of the darkness they were fighting to overcome. They breached the perimeter silently, their movements precise and coordinated. They encountered resistance, but Nico Lowe's team, while trained and fiercely loyal, quickly neutralized the guards. They made their way inside the warehouse, the air thick with the scent of decay and fear. They could hear the sounds of Rossi's men, their voices tense and agitated. The final confrontation took place in a large, open space at the heart of the warehouse. Rossi was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by his remaining loyalists. He was an older man, his face hardened by years of violence and cruelty, his eyes burning with hatred. "Moretti," Rossi spat, his voice filled with venom. "You should have stayed away. You should have accepted your fate." "My fate is not yours to decide, Rossi," Nico Lowe said, his voice cold and steady. "Your reign of terror is over. You think you can defeat me?" Rossi laughed, a harsh, guttural sound. "You're a fool. You're a traitor to your own blood." "My blood is my own," Nico Lowe said. "And I choose a different path. A path of justice, a path of peace." "There is no peace, Moretti," Rossi said. "Only power. And you have none." Rossi raised his hand, signaling his men to attack. The warehouse erupted in violence, a final, desperate clash between the old and the new. Nico Lowe and Lena fought side by side, their love a shield against the darkness, their courage a testament to their commitment to each other. They were outnumbered, but they fought with a ferocity and a determination that surprised their enemies. Lena, despite her lack of formal training, proved to be a formidable fighter. She moved with a grace and agility that belied her elegant appearance, her weapon finding its mark with deadly accuracy. She was a lioness, protecting her mate, fighting for her future. Nico Lowe, driven by a righteous fury and a deep-seated love for Lena, fought like a man possessed. He moved through the warehouse like a whirlwind of destruction, taking down Rossi's men with ruthless efficiency. The battle raged, the outcome uncertain. But slowly, gradually, Niccolò and Lena began to gain the upper hand. Rossi's men, demoralized and outmatched, began to fall. Finally, only Rossi remained. He stood alone, his face contorted with rage and desperation. He raised his weapon, aiming it at Niccolò. "You may have won this battle, Moretti," he hissed, "but you'll never win the war. The old ways will always prevail." Before he could pull the trigger, Lena stepped in front of Niccolò, shielding him with her body. "No, Rossi," she said, her voice firm and unwavering. "The old ways are over. It's time for a new beginning." Rossi hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering between Lena and Niccolò. He saw the love between them, the strength of their bond, the unwavering determination in their eyes. He saw that he had lost, that his world was crumbling around him. With a final, desperate cry, he turned his weapon on himself. The shot echoed through the warehouse, followed by a heavy silence. It was over. The final confrontation had ended. The darkness had been defeated. Niccolò rushed to Lena, pulling her into his arms. He held her tight, his body trembling with relief and gratitude. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm fine," Lena said, her voice steady. "It's over, Niccolò. We won." They stood together, in the silence of the warehouse, the blood on the floor a testament to the battle they had fought, the victory they had achieved. They had faced their enemies, they had overcome their fears, and they had emerged triumphant. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties had been resolved. The old ways were dead, and a new era had begun. A new beginning built from the ruins. Epilogue. 5 years passed. The city, once a breeding ground for corruption and violence, had undergone a remarkable transformation. Under Niccolò's leadership, and with Lena by his side, the Moretti family had become a force for good, investing in the community, creating opportunities, and promoting peace. The old Mafia families had been dismantled, their power broken, their influence extinguished. A new generation had risen, one that valued justice, equality, and cooperation over violence, intimidation, and fear. Niccolò and Lena, now married, lived in a renovated villa overlooking the city. It was not the secluded haven in the hills, nor the imposing Moretti mansion, but a home they had built together, a symbol of their love, their commitment, and their shared vision for the future. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, both with their mother's dark hair and their father's striking eyes. They were raised with love, with kindness, with a deep understanding of the importance of justice and compassion. Lena, no longer a ghost, no longer a captive, had found her true calling. She worked tirelessly to support the community, to empower women, to create a better world for her children. She had found her voice, her strength, her purpose. Niccolò, freed from the burden of his family's legacy, had become the man he was always meant to be. He was a leader, a visionary, a man who had turned his back on darkness and embraced the light. He was a devoted husband, a loving father, a man who had found redemption in love. One evening, as they sat together on their terrace, watching their children play in the garden below, Niccolò turned to Lena, his eyes filled with a love that had only deepened with time. "We did it, Valeria," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with emotion. "We built a new life, a better life." Lena smiled, reaching out to take his hand. "We did it together, Niccolò," she said. "And we'll continue to do it, every day, for the rest of our lives." He squeezed her hand, his gaze unwavering. "I love you, Valeria," he said. "More than words can say." "I love you too, Niccolò," she said, her voice filled with a love that was both passionate and enduring. They kissed, a kiss that spoke of shared struggles, of overcoming adversity, of finding lasting peace and happiness in each other's arms. It was a kiss that sealed their love, their commitment, their enduring legacy. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the city, they held each other close, their children's laughter echoing in the air. They had faced the darkness, they had fought for their future, and they had emerged victorious. They had built a new world, a world founded on love, trust, and a shared commitment to creating a better tomorrow. The ghosts of the past were finally laid to rest, and the future stretched before them, bright with promise, filled with hope, and illuminated by the enduring power of their love. The city below, once a symbol of their struggles, now reflected their triumph, a testament to their courage, their resilience, and their unwavering belief in the possibility of redemption. The end.